Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio Channel. Tonight we step into a world of wet riverbanks, greedy rumours, and candlelit letters, where a single bright fleck of gold can make a farmer feel chosen, a sailor feel restless, and a shop clerk forget his own name by morning. What would pull you from a warm bed, a familiar road, or the smell of bread rising in your own kitchen? What secret force could persuade thousands of ordinary people to cross oceans, deserts, and mountain passes just to kneel in cold mud and chase a shine no bigger than a fingernail? California in the 1850s offers exactly that kind of spell. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you are here, comment with your location and your local time. Now, dim the lights, and you find yourself standing in a crowded world where news travels faster than caution, and the promise of gold begins as a whisper that touches your ear so softly you almost laugh at it. At first it sounds ridiculous. Someone says a mill worker found gold in a river in the far west. Someone else says the streams there run yellow with wealth. Another man at the dock swears he heard that nuggets lie on the ground, waiting for anyone sober enough to bend down and collect them. That last detail is almost certainly nonsense, but rumour has never required manners, and it definitely does not require accuracy. It only needs hunger. You live in a century that still believes fortune can arrive in a single stroke. A crop can fail in one season, a ship can sink in one storm, a person can lose everything by Tuesday and start dreaming again by Wednesday. So when stories of California begin to drift through taverns, boarding houses, post offices, and harbour fronts, people lean closer. They lower their voices. They repeat every wild claim with the tender care usually reserved for scripture. The words take on a heat of their own. You hear the sound of it everywhere. In city streets, boots strike cobbles while newspaper boys shout fresh reports. In rural towns, wagon wheels rattle past fences as neighbours carry tales from market day. In ports, rigging taps against masts in the wind while sailors trade gossip between coils of rope that smell of salt and tar. Even in quieter places, the rumour arrives eventually, tucked inside a folded letter or spoken across a store counter while scales weigh flour and sugar. Gold has been found in California. Gold. California. The two words start to cling together until they sound less like a place and more like a promise. There is, of course, a real beginning beneath the exaggeration. In January 1848, gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. That much is solid history. Yet the scale of the early excitement remains slightly misty, because messages travelled slowly at first, and many people simply did not believe them. Historians still argue over how quickly ordinary Americans grasped what the discovery might mean, because disbelief and excitement moved side by side like stubborn mules. Even President James K. Polk had to publicly confirm the reports later that year before many doubters gave in. Once that happened, the whisper became a roar. You can almost feel the atmosphere changing around you. Men who once spoke calmly now talk with shining eyes and quick hands. Shopkeepers begin watching customers drift away mid-sentence, distracted by some new account from the West. Wives listen with tight mouths while husbands describe rivers and valleys they have never seen. Mothers hear sons say they will only be gone for a season, which is the 19th century version of trust me. This is a great idea. It rarely is. The smell of ordinary life becomes strangely fragile. Wood smoke curls from chimneys. Soap clings to fresh laundry. Supper cools on tables. Leather boots dry by the door. These familiar things suddenly compete with imaginary scents from California. Wet pine, river water, campfire ash, fresh turned soil, animal sweat, and the metallic hope that people seem able to smell without ever reaching the place itself. It is remarkable what desire can do to the senses. A person can almost inhale a fantasy. You begin to understand why the stories work so well. The 1850s are not gentle for most people. Work is hard, pay is uncertain, land is expensive in some places and exhausted in others. Opportunity often belongs to men born in the right family, in the right city, with the right handshake. Then California appears like a rude interruption. It suggests that luck may be lying loose in the ground, unattached to old names or inherited property. All you need, people say, is grit, perhaps a pan, perhaps a shovel, perhaps the willingness to smell terrible for months. Suddenly that seems manageable, and so the fever starts. That is the correct word for it, because it behaves like an illness. It takes hold of judgment first. You notice it in how people speak. A carpenter no longer talks about building houses. He talks about the house he will buy after one good month in the diggings. A tailor stops measuring cloth and starts calculating how many ounces of gold would settle every debt he has ever known. A clerk with ink on his cuffs begins picturing himself in boots by a riverbank, independent at last, which is a charming fantasy until you remember he has never slept outdoors willingly. Some people resist. They have seen crazes before. They know a crowd can run toward nonsense with shocking confidence. They point out the distance, the cost, the risks, the disease, the hunger, and the fact that wealth has a habit of preferring other people. They are sensible. They are also very boring to anyone infected with gold fever. In the face of sudden hope, prudence sounds like jealousy. Newspapers help fan the flames, though not always on purpose. Reports of discoveries spread across the United States, Latin America, Europe, Australia, and China. Editors know gold sells papers almost as well as scandal. They publish letters from travellers, notices from merchants, and breathless updates that mix fact with speculation so thoroughly that readers hardly bother separating them. One issue may describe rich strikes in a riverbed, another mentions lawlessness, high prices, and sickness. Guess which part most readers remember? Not the dysentery, never the dysentery. By 1849, the migration becomes so famous that those who head west are remembered as the 49ers, though many continue arriving well into the 1850s. You are living in the years when the first great rush has not faded but thickened into something more complicated. The easiest gold is already harder to find than the earlier stories suggest, yet the image of easy wealth remains stubbornly alive. That contrast shapes everything. People are lured by outdated dreams into an increasingly demanding reality. It is a very human arrangement. The people drawn by the rush come from everywhere. That is one of the most striking truths of Gold Rush California. Americans from eastern states push west. Yes, but so do Mexicans, Chileans, Peruvians, Chinese migrants, French adventurers, Australian sailors, and men from regions that many Americans of the time could barely locate on a map. Ports around the Pacific begin sending human cargo towards San Francisco with astonishing speed. The goldfields become a global meeting ground, noisy with accents, competing customs, and mutual suspicion. A quirky detail from the era is that ships were sometimes abandoned in San Francisco Bay because crews deserted almost immediately to seek gold inland. Imagine arriving by sea and watching a vessel lose its captain or cook, and half its deckhands to a rumour with dirt under its fingernails. You feel the social order loosening. Men who were nobodies elsewhere now speak as if destiny has singled them out. Clerks call themselves prospectors before they have even bought a pan. Labourers straighten their backs and speak of independence. Gentlemen, or at least men eager to cosplay as gentlemen, study maps and ask bold questions about routes they could not survive for 3 days. Everyone seems slightly unreal, as though the country has stepped into a dream and forgotten breakfast. Yet beneath the excitement sits something harder. Greed. Yes, but also desperation. Not everyone goes west because they crave adventure. Some leave because ordinary life has narrowed around them like a tightening collar. Debt presses against their throat. Bad harvests ruin a family. Employment dries up. A relative writes from afar that there may still be room in California for a man willing to endure anything. That final phrase is the true price. Willing to endure anything. Gold does not merely attract hope. It exposes what people are prepared to suffer for the chance of changing their fate. You start to imagine yourself among them. Perhaps your hands are not yet calloused for mining. Perhaps you still smell of ink, hay, wool, salt, or machine oil from the life you know. But already your mind is travelling. You picture streams flashing under sun. You picture hills scored with trails. You picture yourself lifting a pan, swirling water and sand in practiced circles, watching dark grit slide away while something bright remains. The touch of cold river water bites your skin in the imagination. The morning air smells of pine and damp stone. Far off, you hear men calling to one another, picks striking earth, a mule snorting under its load. The whole scene glows with possibility, mostly because you are not there yet. That is the exquisite cruelty of the gold rush at its beginning, before the blisters, before the inflated prices, before the raw camps and broken promises. California exists in the mind as a personal miracle. You do not picture the thousands who will fail. You picture the one fortunate soul who finds enough in a week to rewrite a lifetime. You do not picture the men coughing in dirty tents. You picture sunlight on water. You do not picture claims already crowded with strangers. You picture open land and lucky timing. Hope edits reality with a ruthless hand. And still, one cannot blame you entirely. California truly is changing the world around you. Towns swell. Shipping routes adjust. Banks, merchants, transport companies, and politicians all begin to feel the pull. The United States had only recently taken California from Mexico in the aftermath of war, and the rush accelerates its transformation with startling speed. Statehood arrives in 1850. That is mainstream history. But the human texture matters more in the moment. A distant territory suddenly becomes the centre of thousands of private fantasies, each one packed in a carpet bag or stitched into a coat lining. Somewhere, a man melts down family silver to finance the journey. Somewhere else, another sells his farm tools, convinced he will never need them again. A young woman watches brothers leave and wonders which of them will return with money, or return at all. Boarding houses fill with talk. General stores sell out of boots, blankets, and picks. Printers make money from maps that flatter certainty. Preachers warn against greed. Gamblers quietly prepare to profit from it. You can hear the age cracking open. By now the rumour has moved beyond curiosity. It has become instruction. Go west. Go quickly. Go before the good spots vanish. Go before someone else becomes rich with the luck that should have been yours. That last thought is particularly dangerous. The gold rush thrives on comparison. It is not enough that wealth might exist. Someone else might get there first. Sleep becomes harder after that. So you stand at the threshold of the California dream in the early 1850s, feeling its strange warmth on your face. The room around you still holds the simple textures of home. Rough wood, lamplight, wool cloth, cooling tea, the faint grit of daily work beneath your fingernails. Yet your mind has already crossed a continent. That is how it begins for so many gold miners. Not with a shovel, not with a claim, not even with a journey, but with a story told in the right tone at the right moment, until ordinary life starts to feel smaller than it did the day before. And once that feeling settles in, once the West begins shining inside your imagination, the road to California is already opening under your feet. You do not simply decide to go to California. You begin unravelling your life stitch by stitch, and every thread resists a little. A chair must be sold. A horse must be borrowed, traded, or mournfully let go. A coat must be patched for one more season. Someone counts coins on a table scarred by years of use, then counts them again as if arithmetic might grow kinder under candlelight. The room smells of tallow, coffee, and damp wool. Outside, a wagon creaks past in the dark, and the sound feels like a summons. The practical questions arrive at once. How do you reach a place so far away that many people still picture it as a blur at the edge of the continent? Do you sail around Cape Horn, where the sea can toss a ship like a spoon in a pot? Do you cross the Isthmus of Panama, where tropical heat presses against your lungs and disease lurks in the shade? Or do you head overland across plains, deserts, and mountains, trusting oxen, luck, and whatever God has available for emergency use? Each route is famous for suffering. You are merely choosing your flavour. The idea of California sounds bright. The journey sounds damp, dusty, and expensive. Yet departure fever makes even terrible plans look noble. Men who have never packed sensibly in their lives now hold grave discussions about flour, bacon, boots, and waterproof canvas. Boots matter more than grand speeches. This is one of the first lessons. The West may glitter in the mind, but your feet arrive there first, and they complain bitterly. You notice how quickly ordinary goods become charged with meaning. A tin cup is no longer a cup. It is survival. A blanket is not bedding. It is the difference between one more night and a freezing misery that makes you question every choice since infancy. Rope, needles, coffee, soap, axes, pans, knives, heavy shirts, wool socks, dried beans, and iron cookware all pile into lists so long that hope begins to feel very heavy. Some migrants spend lavishly on equipment they do not understand. Others travel too light and pay for it with discomfort almost immediately. Merchants, naturally, are delighted either way. The sounds of preparation are wonderfully unromantic. Hammers knock shut shipping crates. Pen nibs scratch letters of farewell. Saws rasp through boards for wagon repairs. Mules stamp and snort while harness buckles jingle in a yard that smells of mud and animal heat. Somewhere nearby, a mother folds shirts with brisk movements because lingering would lead to tears, and tears would encourage second thoughts. A boarding house owner records unpaid balances in a ledger, already knowing several names will vanish into the horizon without settling them. The whole country seems to be packing itself badly. Some travellers leave from eastern ports for the sea routes, New York, Boston, New Orleans, and other harbours pulse with restless traffic. The docks are thick with tar, salt, fish scales, shouting stevedores, and the sour sweetness of cargo left too long in the sun. Men bound for California crowd onto packet ships, steamers, and any vessel that might inch them westward. Trunks bang against gangplanks. Families cling for one last embrace. Promises spill out in nervous clusters. I will write. I will return in a year. I will come back rich. That last sentence lands with the confidence of a man who has never yet been humbled by a shovel. The Cape Horn route is the longest sea passage. It carries you all the way down around South America, through waters famous for violence. The voyage can take many months, and conditions aboard ship are often cramped, monotonous, and unpleasant in ways that creative language struggles to improve. You sleep among strangers. The air below deck turns stale with sweat, wet wood, unwashed clothes, and bilge. Food is salted, dried, boiled, repeated, and then repeated again with new disappointment. A quirky truth from the era is that some passengers, desperate for diversion during these long sailings, organise shipboard newspapers, mock courts, amateur concerts, and absurd little clubs just to keep despair from chewing through their wits. Human beings will invent a committee anywhere. The sea itself is a moody companion. Some days the ship glides under a mild sky while gulls wheel overhead and the water looks almost polished. On other days, spray lashes your face sharp as thrown gravel, and the deck pitches beneath you with malicious enthusiasm. Ropes groan, sails crack, the hull shudders. You clutch a rail slick with salt and think fondly of solid land, which is always the highest praise available to land. Around Cape Horn, storms can be especially brutal. Ice, wind, and towering waves make the southern oceans feel like an argument between nature and human ambition. Nature usually has the better voice. The Panama route is shorter in theory and chaotic in practice. You sail to the Caribbean side, cross the narrow isthmus, then find another vessel on the Pacific. This sounds efficient until real life enters the room in muddy boots. Panama in the gold rush era is hot, humid, and crowded with hurried travellers, speculators, mule handlers, boatmen, thieves, and disease. The air feels thick enough to drink. Clothing clings to your skin. Mosquitoes whine near your ears with professional dedication. Rivers, jungle tracks, and rough transit arrangements turn the crossing into a humid trial of patience and sanitation. Cholera and other diseases haunt these travel corridors, especially where sanitation is poor and crowds are thick. That is plain historical fact and one of the constant shadows over migration in this period. Not every traveller understands the causes of illness, because medical ideas remain incomplete and often contradictory. Historians still debate how migrants interpreted outbreaks in real time, since people describe disease through fear, rumour, providence, filth, bad air, and simple bad luck all at once. Whatever explanation they preferred, the result was the same. A healthy man at breakfast could be buried by sunset. Yet many still choose Panama because the route seems faster, and speed feels like fortune. Every day saved appears to preserve some imagined claim in California. Men rush through ports with the fixed gaze of gamblers approaching a table. They bargain loudly for canoes, mules, guides, baggage handling, and passage onward, usually at prices that would make a calmer person choke. This is another small comedy of the gold rush. People hurry to California to escape being overcharged, only to be overcharged at every stage of the attempt. Then there is the Overland Trail, the epic route through the American interior. This path carries you across a huge, moving geography of grass, river, alkali dust, heat, storm, and mountain stone. Wagon trains depart in spring because timing matters cruelly. Leave too late and snow may trap you in the Sierra. Leave too early and grass for the animals may not be ready. Suddenly even the calendar has opinions about your ambition. Overland travel has a rough rhythm. Dawn begins in chill air with the smell of smoke, coffee, damp canvas, and livestock. Men yawn into their hats. Women cinch bonnets and stir kettles. Children blink at a world that has become wheels and dust. Oxen lean into yokes. Harness chains clink. Then the line begins to move with groaning wheels and a low chorus of animal breath. The trail stretches ahead as twin scars across the land. And you follow it because thousands have already pressed it into the earth. The plains can seem vast enough to rearrange your mind. Grass rolls in the wind like water. Larks flicker up from the ground. At night, the stars appear with such cold abundance that you feel very small and oddly comforted by it. Then afternoon arrives with heat, flies, and a broken axle, and the poetry suffers a setback. That is the common pattern. The overland journey offers beauty in one hand and nuisance in the other. River crossings are among the most dreaded moments. Water moves brown and strong, hiding depth and current beneath an innocent surface. Wagons must be ferried, floated, or forced through at risk. Animals panic, wheels sink. People shout instructions that no one can hear properly over splashing in confusion. Wet clothing slaps against your skin afterward, and the smell of river mud clings to everything. Some travellers lose supplies, some lose beasts, some lose far more. A crossing can turn ordinary progress into grief in the space of a minute. Food on the trail becomes both ordinary and deeply emotional. Flour, bacon, beans, coffee, dried fruit if you're lucky, and the occasional bit of game if someone shoots well enough. Meals are repetitive because repetition is transportable. The taste of dust gets into everything. You chew with grit between your teeth. Water quality is uncertain, and fresh vegetables become a memory discussed almost tenderly. The body misses what the imagination overlooks. It misses green things. It misses softness. It misses not sleeping beside a wheel while something unseen snorts in the dark. And still there are curious pockets of community. Travellers swap remedies, gossip, trail warnings, and baking tricks with a seriousness that once might have been reserved for theology. Someone produces a fiddle one evening, and tired people gather around as if music were medicine. Children chase each other around wagons until called in. A dog wanders through camp hoping for scraps and moral support. Under the smoke and starlight, strangers become temporary neighbours because isolation would be heavier than company. The route west is not empty wilderness. You pass through lands already known, used, and inhabited by indigenous peoples whose worlds are being strained and damaged by the flood of migrants. This is an essential historical truth. Many overland diaries from the era describe meetings shaped by trade, caution, misunderstanding, or fear. Some encounters are peaceful and practical. Others are coloured by the migrants' prejudice or by tensions created through trespass, disease, and competition over resources. The popular myths of the trail often flatten this complexity into crude stereotypes, which tells you more about the storytellers than about the reality. By the time you climb toward the western mountains, the journey has changed the meaning of wealth. At the start, gold may have looked like the whole point. Now dry socks, sound wheels, healthy animals, and a spring that runs clear can feel just as precious. Skin toughens, tempers shorten, faces brown in the sun, hands crack. You learn the touch of coarse reins, the stiffness of cold mornings, the blessed warmth of a fire built quickly before wind takes the flame. Survival becomes a sequence of small competencies. Not everyone travelling west is a lone young man with a reckless grin. That popular image is only part of the story. There are older men trying one last venture, immigrants carrying whole languages with them, husbands and wives, families with children, merchants pursuing customers, doctors seeking opportunity, preachers seeking souls, and professional drifters who would follow any crowd with pockets. California draws idealists, cynics, fools, and people with no remaining choices on the road. Distinctions blur under dust. There is also the matter of abandonment. Along the routes, you see discarded trunks, broken furniture, crates split open, stoves too heavy to haul farther, books left beside the trail, and once treasured objects surrendered to necessity. This material shedding is one of the most haunting features of migration. Each item marks a moment when reality beats sentiment. A man may begin the trip with a walnut chair, a spare coat, and 3 cast-iron pans, convinced he needs all of them. 2 months later, he would gladly trade the lot for one less hill. As California draws nearer, excitement returns in strange bursts. The light changes, the air shifts, pines replace prairie smells, mountain water cuts colder over your hands. Talk in camp revives. Men speculate again about strikes, riverbeds, and how many ounces can really be won in a week. It is charming that fatigue never fully kills fantasy. It merely lets it nap. When you finally near the edge of the gold country, you carry more than baggage. You carry salt in your clothes from ocean spray or white dust in every seam from the trail. You carry the memory of crowded decks, jungle damp, broken wagons, sour bacon, prayerful river crossings, and countless little discomforts that no newspaper ever printed with sufficient respect. You also carry a sharpened understanding. California has already cost you something before you have lifted a single pan. The road west is not a prelude politely waiting off stage. It is the first proving ground, and it teaches you the central truth of the gold rush with admirable bluntness. Nothing about this dream is easy. Not even getting close enough to begin. At last you enter the gold country itself, and the first surprise is how little it resembles a dream. The hills are handsome enough in the right light, with oak trees gripping the slopes and pines rising dark against the sky. But beauty shares the ground with a great deal of mud, shouting, and disappointment. You had perhaps imagined a shining valley where fortune waited in polite silence. Instead, you arrive in a place that smells of wet earth, wood smoke, mule sweat, frying pork, and men who have been too busy hoping to wash properly. The camps appear suddenly and without elegance. A bend in the road brings you to a scatter of canvas tents, brush shelters, rough plank cabins, and half-finished lean-tos crouched beside a stream. Laundry hangs stiff in the breeze. Tin pans glint in weak sunlight. A dog noses through ashes. Somewhere a hammer strikes wood with grim persistence, and from the creek comes the steady splash and scrape of men working gravel. Nothing is arranged for charm. Everything is arranged for urgency. Your boots sink at once. That seems only fair. The path through camp is chopped into ruts by wheels, hooves, and impatient feet. Water stands in shallow puddles the colour of tea. If the weather turns warm, the ground grows sticky and rank. If rain comes, the whole settlement turns to a patient kind of misery. Yet nobody looks surprised. These are people who have agreed, more or less, to live badly in exchange for a chance at sudden riches. Comfort has been demoted. The noise is constant. Picks ring against stone, shovels scrape, men call to one another in English, Spanish, French, Cantonese, and languages you cannot place. A mule brays with the wounded dignity of a creature deeply unimpressed by human ambition. Cards slap on a table outside a tent where a few men have already decided gambling is preferable to mining, which may prove one of the wisest decisions in camp. Metal pans knock together. Water gurgles over rocks. At night the sounds soften, but never vanish. Someone coughs. Someone snores. Someone argues under their breath about a claim line measured in tempers rather than inches. Your eyes keep searching for the famous gleam. That is natural. You have crossed a continent or an ocean, perhaps both in spirit, and now you want evidence. You crouch beside a creek where men stand calf deep in numbing water, swirling gravel in broad, shallow pans. Their motions look practiced and almost graceful from a distance. Up close they are repetitive, cold, and hard on the back. Each pan is filled with sand and small stones, shaken and dipped, washed and tilted until lighter material slips away. What remains at the bottom might be nothing, or a few black sands, or a tiny yellow flash that tightens every chest nearby. That flash does happen. Gold is not imaginary. This is important to say because the truth is not that the rush was foolish from start to finish. Gold really was found in California streams, bars, ravines, and hills. Placer mining in the early years could produce remarkable finds, especially for those who arrived early, worked a good spot, or got very lucky. But the first sight of the goldfields teaches you another truth just as quickly. Gold may be real, yet it does not lie around waiting for a stranger with pleasant intentions. You begin to understand the geography of hope. Everyone asks where the good diggings are, and nobody answers plainly unless they're lying, boasting, or leaving. Streams have names carried from mouth to mouth like spells. The American River, the Yuba, the Feather, the Mokelumne, the Tuolumne. River bars and gulches become famous for a week, then crowded, then abandoned, then mysteriously revived by a new rumour. A scrap of information can move men faster than a trumpet call. One day a camp feels crowded beyond reason. The next day half its population has vanished toward a ravine where someone reportedly took out an ounce before breakfast. The look of the miners themselves is another lesson. Many are younger than you expected, many are older. Nearly all appear roughened by labour, travel, or poor living. Their shirts are faded with sweat and repeated wear. Trousers are patched at the knee and seat. Beards grow where razors have lost the argument. Hands are cracked, nails dark with ground in grit. Hats sag under dust. A few men still carry traces of city habits in their posture or speech. But camp life works quickly on vanity. After a while everyone smells a little like smoke and river water. There is also colour and variety, more than the popular legends often admit. You see Mexican miners with deep practical knowledge of placer methods shaped by earlier mining traditions. You hear Chilean accents near the water. You pass Chinese migrants moving with tools neatly arranged and clothing cared for as well as conditions allow. A Frenchman gestures dramatically while describing a claim dispute to an audience that understands perhaps half his words and all of his indignation. California mining camps in the 1850s are astonishingly international. They are also tense places because diversity under scarcity does not automatically produce harmony. Competition sharpens every difference. The camp stores are among the busiest corners of this rough world. They are part shop, part rumour exchange, part trap for the underprepared. Inside, shelves groan with boots, candles, flour, coffee, bacon, beans, socks, picks, shovels, tobacco, medicine of doubtful value, and luxuries priced as though carried on the backs of angels. The smell is thick with leather, kerosene, tobacco leaf, spilled molasses, and damp wool. A bar of soap can seem oddly precious. Fresh eggs, if any appear, are treated with reverence usually reserved for jewels. One mainstream fact of the mining era is that prices in the goldfields were famously inflated. A man might win a little dust in the creek and lose its value by evening on supper, tools, and shelter. You soon learn that camp architecture is a language of confidence. The newest arrivals often sleep under canvas, brush, or plain optimism. Men who expect to stay longer begin building with logs, split boards, and stolen moments of carpentry. A proper cabin suggests either luck stubbornness or a refusal to admit defeat. Roofs leak, floors tilt. Smoke refuses the chimney and explores the room instead. Still, a shack with a door can feel almost luxurious after months on the road. The touch of a dry blanket on a raised bunk seems like civilization trying not to laugh. The social order is improvised and therefore fascinating. Some camps attempt rules about claims, boundaries, water use, and mutual behaviour. Others operate on a mixture of precedent, loud voices, and whoever arrived with the larger friends. Notices are posted on boards. trees, or tent walls. Meetings are called. Men vote with grave seriousness on matters that would look absurd anywhere else, such as how many feet of creek bank one person may occupy while standing in freezing water looking miserable. Yet these rules matter, because without them camp life would dissolve into immediate chaos. Sometimes it nearly does. You feel the weather directly here. Morning comes thin and cold, with mist rising off the stream and settling against your sleeves. Metal tools bite your hands. Water numbs your ankles in minutes. By midday, the sun may burn hot enough to draw resin scents from pine and dust from every path. Then evening slides down quickly, and the camp glows with firelight, lanterns, and the red ends of pipes lifted in the dark. The mountains teach you not to trust a single hour to speak for the whole day. For all the roughness, first impressions can still intoxicate. There is a raw energy in the air, a sense that ordinary rules have loosened. A clerk can become a digger, a sailor can become a trader, a farmer can become a gambler, a cook, a blacksmith, or a cautionary tale. California offers reinvention, though it charges heavily for the service. You can feel that possibility moving through camp like heat above a fire. Then there is the matter of claims. This is the pulse beneath everything. Men do not simply work anywhere they please. They mark out spots with stakes, written notices, stones, memory, witnesses, or confidence suspiciously close to theft. A good claim can transform a season. A poor one can consume it. Since formal government authority is often weak or distant in the diggings, local custom becomes law in practice. Historians still argue about how orderly these systems truly were across different camps, because some records describe detailed cooperation, while others reveal improvisation bordering on comedy. Much depended on the people present, the richness of the ground, and whether anyone had slept recently. You watch a few miners pan out the last wash from a bucket. Most find almost nothing worth speaking of. One man lets out a sharp breath and bends closer. In the dark crease of the pan lie several bright flakes, tiny as fish scales yet powerful enough to change the atmosphere around him. Necks crane, eyes narrow, admiration and envy arrive together. It is one of the defining feelings of the goldfields, that mixture of hope for yourself and irritation at another man's success. You congratulate him with your mouth and do arithmetic with your heart. The odd details of camp life keep catching your attention. A barber may be working under a canvas awning beside a mule path. A preacher might hold services on a stump while nearby someone cheats at cards with impressive concentration. One camp may contain a circulating library of battered books, another a dancing tent, another a blacksmith's forge whose sparks leap into dusk like restless insects. A wonderfully strange historical tidbit is that some miners carried canaries, fiddles, pet dogs, or even small potted plants into camp, tiny gestures of domestic order in a world otherwise devoted to upheaval. People will decorate discomfort rather than admit it owns them. You also see how fast illusion begins to fray. New arrivals often stride in with shining eyes, clean shirts, and the belief that industry alone guarantees success. A week later their sleeves are brown at the cuff, their shoulders ache, and their conversation has turned technical in self-defense. They speak of gravel layers, bars, current, bedrock, and where colour showed in the last pan. Language changes when hope meets labour. It grows more precise. The streams themselves hold a stern beauty. Water slides over rounded stones with a ceaseless sound that can soothe you for a moment before reminding you how much washing remains. Gravel shifts under your boots. Cold bites through wool and leather. Sunlight strikes the surface in broken silver patterns. Along the banks lie piles of overturned earth, abandoned pits, cut brush, and the scars of thousands of urgent hands. Nature remains lovely, though increasingly rearranged by greed. You cannot ignore the strain placed on the land. Trees fall for cabins, sluices, fuel, and supports. Riverbanks are dug, scraped, and undermined. Mud clouds water once clear. Animals are driven hard. Camp refuse gathers in ugly corners. The early gold rush begins a long environmental transformation of California, and even in these first rough settlements the signs are visible. Prosperity leaves a mess before it leaves a monument. That may be one of history's less charming habits. What settles over you by the end of these first days is not simple disappointment, and not simple excitement either. It is recognition. The gold fields are real, but they are real in a stubborn, material way. They are cold water, sore backs, inflated prices, sharp rivalries, and occasional glitter in a pan. They are crowded with men who arrived chasing legend and stayed because legend had just enough truth to keep them kneeling in the creek one day more. You stand among them now, boots caked, nose full of smoke and mud, ears ringing with tools and voices, and you understand at last that California has not welcomed you into a fairy tale. It has admitted you into a working world where fortune is visible just often enough to keep everyone from walking away. Morning in the digging begins before you're ready to forgive it. The air is cold enough to sting your nose, and the canvas above you has gathered a thin dampness that touches your cheek when you sit up too quickly. Somewhere outside, a pan clatters against a rock, a mule snorts with theatrical misery. Wood smoke creeps through camp in pale ribbons, carrying the smell of pine, ash, and bacon fat already sputtering in an iron pan. You open your eyes to a world that does not care whether you slept well, and this indifference is one of the most reliable features of mining life. You pull on stiff clothes that never seem fully dry. Your shirt smells faintly of sweat, smoke, and river water. Your boots are worse. Everything you own now appears to have a fine understanding with dust and mud. The touch of cold leather against your fingers is enough to make you wince. Yet there is no time for ceremony. Men are already moving toward the creek, carrying pans, picks, shovels, rocker boxes, or whatever tools their means and optimism have allowed them to acquire. Breakfast is often simple and uninspired, which is a polite way of saying it barely deserves the name. Coffee, if you have it, tastes smoky and wonderful because it is hot. Bread may be heavy, pork may be greasy. Beans may have survived from the night before and are not improved by reflection. Still, the body wants fuel, and the body usually wins these arguments. You eat fast, half listening to camp talk around you. Someone claims a nearby bar produced excellent colour yesterday. Someone else says that report is exaggerated nonsense. A third man swears his luck is changing because he dreamt of yellow stones. Mining camps are full of geology, mathematics, and superstition, often in the same sentence. Then you head for the water. The stream looks almost peaceful in the early light. Mist hovers above it. The current folds around stones with a silvery hush. Birds call from the brush. For a moment you could imagine this place as a retreat for poets or fishermen. Then you step in, and the illusion ends at once. The water is shockingly cold. It grips your ankles, then your calves, with a kind of personal insult. Gravel shifts under your boots. Your knees complain. Your back tightens before work even begins. California gold mining, at least in its placer form, is not glamorous labour decorated with sunshine. It is repetitive effort performed in awkward positions while cold water negotiates aggressively with your bones. A basic day of panning begins with gathering pay dirt. That phrase sounds cheerful, but the dirt itself is just gravel, sand, and mud taken from places where gold might have settled. You shovel from crevices, bars, or the edges of the stream, searching especially near bedrock or behind obstacles where heavier particles may have dropped out of the current. Then you fill your pan and kneel or crouch to wash it. The motion is simple to describe and stubborn to master. You dip the pan below the surface and shake it side to side, letting water loosen the lighter material. You tilt and swirl, pebbles rise, sand shifts, mud turns the water brown. Your wrists learn a rhythm, your fingers numb. Over and over you repeat the movement, carefully shedding lighter gravel while trying not to lose anything dense and promising. The pan grows lighter, yet your shoulders grow heavier. That seems unfair. But gold mining has an advanced degree in unfairness. At first every glint teases you. Sika flashes, wet quartz shines. Tiny bright particles catch the light and make your pulse leap, only to reveal themselves as worthless mischief. Fool's gold gains its name honestly. So does disappointment. Experienced miners develop an eye for real colour, that heavy warm yellow that does not dart away like a trick of light. You're still learning. which means your emotions spend much of the day bouncing between excitement and embarrassment. If you do find gold in the pan, it is usually not a dramatic nugget large enough to reorder your biography. More often it is fine dust, a few flakes, perhaps a tiny picker no bigger than a lentil. Real? Yes. Valuable? Yes. Life-changing? Not necessarily. One of the great misunderstandings of the California rush is the idea that most miners struck rich quickly. In truth, many earned little, some earned enough to continue, and only a small fraction found extraordinary amounts. A day's work might leave you with less than you had imagined and more than you want to admit. That gap between fantasy and result becomes the emotional weather of the diggings. To increase your chances, you may join others using a rocker, also called a cradle. This device is a wooden box mounted on curved runners, allowing it to rock back and forth. Gravel is fed into the top with water. Riffles and slats help trap heavier material while lighter sediment washes away. The contraption makes a hollow scraping sound as it moves, somewhere between a nursery object and a machine with trust issues. It is more efficient than simple panning, especially when working as a pair or small team. One man shovels dirt, another pours water, another rocks the box. Everyone gets wet, tired, and opinionated. The rocker has a practical beauty when it works well. Water flashes through the box, mud slides out. At intervals, you clean the riffles and inspect the concentrated heavy material. The touch of black sand against your fingertips becomes familiar. It sticks and resists. Sometimes among it lies the soft gleam you want. A few grains, a few more. Enough to make the whole labour feel briefly reasonable. Then you resume. Because brief reasonableness is not the same thing as success. Some miners work long toms and sluices where conditions allow. These longer troughs process greater volumes of gravel with running water and riffles, improving output if you have the equipment, manpower, and site for it. They also increase the scale of labour, more digging, more hauling, more arguments about water rights and claim boundaries. Mining technology in the early 1850s is advancing quickly because the easiest surface deposits do not remain easy for long. A mainstream fact of the period is that methods became more elaborate as miners sought to recover gold from tougher ground. The dream of effortless picking gives way to engineering, cooperation, and more sweat. By midday, your body understands the routine in a language older than thought. Shoulders burn, lower back aches. Hands feel both swollen and numb. Wet cuffs rub the skin raw. Sunlight now beats down with enough strength to lift the smell of warm mud, trampled grass, and mineral water into the air. Flies appear with insulting enthusiasm. Somewhere nearby, someone curses softly at a pan that produced almost nothing. Nearby, another man laughs too loudly after seeing a few good flakes in his cleanup. In camp, triumph and self-deception often sound remarkably alike. Meals in the middle of the day are brief and practical. You sit on a rock or an overturned bucket and eat bread, cold meat, beans, or whatever has survived transport and heat. The food tastes of smoke, grease, and hunger. Water may be cool and wonderful or muddy and suspicious. Coffee has often turned lukewarm by then, yet it remains precious. Conversation circles the same topics because the work leaves little room for novelty. Who hit colour? Which bar is fading? Whether the upstream men are stealing water, whether prices at the store have risen again, whether a new gulch to the north is truly rich or merely being advertised by liars looking to thin the crowd here. A quirky detail from the diggings is how often miners named promising spots with grand confidence. You hear of places called Last Chance, Poverty Bar, Rich Gulch, Hangtown Creek, Murderer's Bar, and similar names that swing wildly between optimism and menace. The labels reveal camp psychology better than any sermon. Hope and dread live side by side, sharing a shovel. The afternoon often feels longer than the morning, though clocks matter less here than stamina. You continue washing, digging, carrying, scraping. Sometimes you work alone with only the sound of current and tools for company. Sometimes you share a spot with partners, which introduces the special exhaustion of group labour. One man works too slowly, another talks too much. A third has developed theories about where the gold should be that are unsupported by evidence but delivered with heroic confidence. Mining is hard. Mining with other people can be harder. Still, partnerships exist for a reason. The labour is relentless, and many operations are beyond one body's capacity. Friends, countrymen, relatives, or temporary allies often band together to divide costs and effort. They pool tools, share meals, and trust one another with the tally. Trust is valuable because gold is small, portable, and extremely persuasive. Scholars continue to debate how stable many of these informal partnerships really were. Since diaries and camp records show everything from loyal cooperation to dramatic accusations of theft, human nature does not become nobler merely because it is standing in a river. Sometimes a miner gets lucky enough to create a little theatre for everyone nearby. He washes down a pan, pauses, and then lifts it into the light. There it is, a bright crescent of flakes resting against the dark concentrate. The sight draws eyes at once. Even men pretending not to care glance over. Envy moves through camp as quietly as mist. You can admire another man's find and hate it a little in the same breath. Nobody needs to teach that skill. Gold Rush society develops it naturally. Not every hour is spent in water. You may cut brush, shore a shallow pit, haul gravel to a rocker, repair tools, sharpen a pick, or search exposed bedrock crevices with a knife and patient fingers. These crevices can trap small deposits and inspire almost devotional attention. You kneel, scrape, rinse, inspect, repeat. The touch of packed clay under your nails, the sound of water trickling into a narrow crack, the tiny thrill of seeing colour lodged where current once slowed. Such moments keep men working far past reason. As daylight begins to soften, fatigue becomes almost tender in its thoroughness. Your clothes cling cold where they stayed wet. Your knees protest every bend. Shoulders throb in slow pulses. The smell of evening fires begins to spread, mixing with damp earth and the resinous breath of nearby trees. Some men stay in the creek until the light nearly fails, unwilling to surrender an hour that might have held the lucky pan. Others drift back early, too tired to continue or too discouraged to pretend. Mining teaches that persistence and stubbornness are close cousins, often indistinguishable until the account is settled. At day's end comes the clean-up and counting. This is when hope narrows into arithmetic. Gold dust is dried carefully, sometimes in the warmth of a pan or near the fire, then weighed on small scales if the miner owns them, or can borrow a trustworthy set. The sight is always intimate. Tiny particles, almost absurdly small, carry the weight of a whole day's labour. Sometimes the result is enough to lift your mood. Sometimes it is pitiful. A man may have spent 10 hours in cold water for a quantity that barely covers food and supplies, yet tomorrow he will likely return. Why? Because perhaps the next layer is richer. Perhaps the last shovelful was 1 foot from a pocket. Perhaps luck has merely been sulking. That uncertain promise governs the mind. Mining is not only physical labour, it is also a contest with probability, rumour, and self-control. You tell yourself sensible things. You tell yourself that results have been modest. You tell yourself prices are rising and your boots are failing. Then you remember the brief wink of real gold in the pan, and sensible thoughts begin packing their bags. Back in camp, supper tastes better than breakfast because you have earned the right to be less critical. Fires crackle, tin plates knock softly, smoke drifts low. Men compare their takes with studied casualness. One understates, another exaggerates, a third says almost nothing, which may mean poverty or success. Nearby someone sings a snatch of a song in a tired voice. Another man mends a shirt by lantern light with fingers too large for neat stitches. The whole camp smells of wood smoke, wet wool, coffee grounds, and human effort cooling into night. When you finally lie down, the body continues working in memory. Arms twitch. Hands seem still to swirl the pan. In your ears the creek keeps running. In your nose remains the sharp mineral scent of water over stone. This is what a day in the diggings is really like for most miners in California. Not a dramatic procession of nuggets and cheers, but a long sequence of cold, repetition, strain, false glints, tiny winnings, and stubborn return. It is labour so ordinary in its rhythm and so extraordinary in its hopes that men endure it day after day, convinced that one more pan, one more trench, one more hour in the stream might finally tilt the balance in their favour. By the time night has settled properly over camp, you discover that mining does not end when the shovel stops. It merely changes costume. Daylight belongs to water, gravel, and aching muscles. Darkness belongs to cooking smoke, damp bedding, foul air, and the body's long complaint against neglect. If the creek is where hope works its shift, the camp itself is where discomfort collects its wages. You return from the diggings carrying more than tools. Your clothes bring in the smell of cold stream water, sour sweat, wet wool, and clay. Mud dries in ridges along your boots and trouser hems. Your hands feel rough as old rope. Even after you rub them clean as best you can, the grit seems to remain in the lines of your skin, as if the earth has decided to keep a little of you and leave a little of itself behind. In camp, everyone carries this same film of labour. The place has a texture all its own, part soot, part dust, part grease, part human perseverance. The food is the first matter of the evening because hunger makes philosophers of no one. Meals in the California diggings are rarely elegant and often repetitive. Salt pork appears so regularly that it begins to feel less like food and more like a governing principle. Beans are dependable, which is another way of saying they arrive without surprise and leave without glamour. Flour becomes bread, biscuit, flapjack, or a discouraging paste depending on the skill of the cook and the patience of the eater. Coffee is treasured beyond reason, partly for the taste, partly for the warmth, and partly because a hot cup briefly convinces you that life remains manageable. When supplies are good, a miner may add dried apples, rice, molasses, or a little sugar. When luck runs low, supper narrows to whatever can be boiled, fried, or endured. Fresh vegetables are scarce in many camps, especially the rougher and more remote ones. That absence matters. Men speak about onions, cabbage, and potatoes with the reverence of people remembering lost civilization. A mainstream truth of mining life is that diet could be poor, expensive, and nutritionally thin, especially for those living far from more established towns. Scurvy, digestive problems, and simple weakness were never far from the story, though men rarely discussed these conditions with poetic honesty. 19th century masculinity had many rules, and one of them was apparently never admit the beans are defeating you. The smell of camp cooking settles low in the evening air. Bacon fat spits in iron pans. Coffee grounds bubble in blackened pots. Bread scorches at the edges. A hint of onion, if someone has managed to obtain one, can make an entire row of tents seem briefly civilized. Yet these better aromas mingle with less flattering ones. Damp canvas, mule manure, unwashed socks, tobacco smoke, old ashes, stale whiskey, and the lingering breath of shallow latrines all contribute to the local bouquet. It is a smell so complete that after some weeks you scarcely notice it, which may be the mind's most merciful habit. Shelter is another lesson in lowered expectations. You may sleep in a tent if you are lucky, in a brush hut if you're practical, in a rough plank cabin if you have resources, friends, or a promising claim, or beneath whatever improvised roof you have bullied into existence with sticks. Cloth and optimism. Rain tests every structure harshly. Wind finds openings with uncanny intelligence. Cold rises from the ground and settles into your bones. Blankets absorb smoke and damp with equal enthusiasm. A bed is often a sack, a pile of boughs, a wooden bunk, or the simple fact that exhaustion can sleep almost anywhere. Touch becomes important at night because everything is either too hard, too cold, too damp, or too scratchy. The blanket grazes your chin with rough wool fibres. The board beneath your shoulder has opinions about your spine, your boots, left near the fire to dry, stiffen into unfriendly shapes by morning. A man who once cared deeply about soft mattresses and clean sheets now feels grateful for a patch of ground that does not puddle in rain. California has a gift for making standards collapse quietly. And then there is dirt. Dirt on plates, dirt in coffee, dirt worked into cuffs, collars and hat bands, dirt blown into stew and folded into bedding. A camp can lie beside running water and still feel astonishingly unclean because time, warmth, and proper facilities are in short supply. Washing clothes is labour. Washing the body is also labour, and cold water discourages vanity with brisk efficiency. Some men bathe in streams when weather permits. Others postpone the pleasure indefinitely and grow steadily more aromatic. A quirky complaint from the period appears again and again in diaries and letters, the impossible persistence of fleas, lice, bedbugs, and other small creatures that regarded mining camps as a buffet with blankets. The camp night is not quiet enough for real rest. Pots knock. Men laugh too loudly near the fire. Someone sings a verse and forgets the next line. Cards slap against a crate serving as a table. A coughing fit erupts in the darkness and finally subsides. A mule stamps. Dogs bark at nothing obvious. The creek keeps talking in the background. A steady wash over stone that might sound soothing if not accompanied by snores, arguments, and the occasional deeply suspicious thud outside a tent. Even sleep, when it comes, is a negotiated settlement. Poor sanitation hangs over everything. In many camps, waste disposal is crude, inconsistent, or barely discussed until it becomes impossible to ignore. Refuse piles up. Animal remains attract flies. Latrines may be shallow, badly placed, or absent in the earliest, roughest settlements. Water sources can be fouled by careless habits upstream. This matters terribly, though the science of disease transmission is not fully understood by everyone at the time. People know filth and sickness often travel together, even when they argue over why. Historians still disagree about how much practical preventive knowledge miners shared from camp to camp, because local accounts show a jumble of folk wisdom, military habit, guesswork, and occasional common sense. Disease is a constant shadow in this crowded, mobile world. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid-like fevers, respiratory infections, malaria in some regions, and countless stomach troubles trouble the diggings and the towns that feed them. A healthy camp can turn anxious very quickly after a few men are taken ill. The symptoms are often described with plain dread: vomiting, fever, weakness, pain, dehydration, the sudden collapse of a strong body into helplessness. In a place where labour is survival, sickness does not merely frighten. It interrupts income, partnership, mobility, and dignity. You notice how quickly illness changes the social atmosphere. Men who swagger at supper grow quiet around a sick bed. A rough companion becomes gentle when helping another sit up for water. Someone fetches a doctor if one can be found. Someone else mixes mustard plaster, herbal remedy, patent medicine, or whiskey with strong opinions attached. Many treatments of the era are imperfect at best and useless at worst. Yet the effort itself matters, even in camps famous for selfishness. Disease can reveal sudden tenderness. Then again, it can also reveal avoidance. Fear of contagion gives compassion a practical limit. Doctors in the mining regions vary widely in skill, supplies, and reputation. Some are trained, some are merely confident. A man with a black bag and a solemn voice may inspire hope or regret depending on the case. Medicines are costly, limited, and sometimes dubious. Quinine can help against certain fevers. Laudanum calms pain while introducing troubles of its own. Bleeding, purging, tonics, powders, and liniments all make appearances. The frontier has little patience for medical perfection, because perfection failed to arrive on the wagon. Teeth become another quiet misery. This is not the glamorous part of history, which is precisely why it deserves mention. Bad diet, stress, tobacco, and poor dental care leave many miners with toothache fierce enough to spoil sleep and concentration. A camp tooth puller may be a barber, blacksmith, doctor, or any sturdy soul willing to grip pliers and endure screaming. The very idea makes your jaw tense, yet such scenes occur often enough to be utterly ordinary. Gold might be in the ground, but pain is usually in the mouth, back, or gut. Then there are accidents that begin as inconvenience and become infection. A split knuckle from a pick handle, a boot rubbed raw at the heel, a cut from a knife while slicing bacon, a bruised shin from moving stone. In cleaner, calmer circumstances, such injuries might heal with little fuss. In a mining camp they meet mud, cold, poor rest, and overwork, which is an unfriendly committee. Swelling, redness, fever, and stiffness can follow, Men keep working longer than they should because stopping feels more dangerous than continuing. The body is treated like rented equipment. Weather sharpens every discomfort. In rain, clothes remain damp for days, and tents take on the sour smell of wet canvas and trapped breath. In heat, food spoils faster, flies gather thicker, and the camp air turns heavy with sweat and rot. Winter in higher camps can be brutal, with frost edging blankets and water hardening in pails by dawn. Summer dust dries the throat and coats every meal. California contains many climates, but the minor always seems to be in the least convenient part of them. For all this, men still attempt little rituals of cleanliness and home. One scrubs his shirt collar on a board beside the creek. Another shaves by a fragment of mirror nailed to a tree. Socks are hung to dry with almost ceremonial care. A shirt patched neatly can lift the spirit more than logic would predict. One amusing historical detail is that some camps supported itinerant laundresses or washing services that became vital to local life, because no matter how heroic the quest for gold, a man eventually notices when his trousers can nearly stand by themselves. Laundry, in fact, becomes a small economy of survival. Shirts, drawers, blankets, and towels must be washed, dried, mended, and returned. This labour is exhausting and often underappreciated, but without it, camps would sink further into disease and disorder than they already do. Soap is precious. Hot water requires fuel. Scrubbing requires time that miners resent losing. Yet skin chafes less in clean cloth, and a blanket aired in sunlight feels almost medicinal. Domestic labour in the goldfields is never ornamental. It is part of the infrastructure of endurance. The evening fire is where bodies and moods are inspected. Men sit with boots off, rubbing sore feet, checking blisters, picking splinters from their palms, and saying very little for a while. The crackle of wood and the occasional hiss of sap form a kind of rough music. Smoke drifts into your eyes, sparks rise, tin cups warm between stiff fingers. In firelight, every face looks more worn and more honest. Daytime boasts shrink after dark. Hunger, dirt, and fatigue have a way of sanding down vanity. Stories of sickness travel faster than cheer. You hear that a man in a nearby camp died after 3 days of fever. Another was taken by cholera almost before his partners understood he was seriously ill. A cook is down with ague. A trader has a cough that sounds like torn cloth. These reports move from fire to fire, each one gaining detail or superstition as it passes. Some men become cautious about water, others avoid certain camps. A few behave as if luck in gold also protects the lungs and bowels, which is a touching but unsupported belief. When sleep finally takes you, it is often deep but not kind. Dreams become strange in such places. You may see yellow flashes in the bottom of a pan, then wake to the sound of rain hitting canvas and remember exactly where you are. Your throat is dry, your shoulder is numb. Something small and unwelcome may be exploring the blanket seam. The air inside the shelter smells of smoke, wool, leather, and human fatigue. Morning waits beyond the darkness with cold water ready. This is the less advertised side of gold mining in 1850s California. Not only the labour at the stream, but the camp life that presses against every hour around it. Miners eat badly more often than they feast. They sleep lightly more often than they rest. They live among dirt, damp, vermin, inflated food prices, rough shelters, and diseases that can humble even the strongest body. Yet people endure it, partly because they must, partly because others around them are enduring the same, and partly because hope is most stubborn when comfort is least available. The glitter in the pan lasts a second. The grime in camp lasts all night. Between the two, a miner builds his days, one smoky supper and one uneasy sleep at a time. Sooner or later, you learn that the goldfields run on stories almost as much as they run on labour. A man can arrive at breakfast unknown and be legendary by supper if he waves the right pouch in the right light. Another can spend 3 months in honest toil, find almost nothing, and vanish without leaving so much as a rumour behind. Gold rewards spectacle. It also rewards deceit, and the two are frequently dressed in similar clothing. You hear the success stories first because they are the loudest. Someone in a nearby ravine found a nugget the size of a walnut. Someone on the upper bar took out enough dust in 1 week to quit work entirely, which sounds suspiciously like a man who's never tried quitting work in a mining camp full of gamblers. Someone else bought a new mule, a better tent, and a silver watch after striking a pocket at the base of a gravel bank. These tales pass from mouth to mouth with a warmth that makes them feel almost communal. If one miner can do it, perhaps you can too. Hope loves a witness. And the lucky strikes do happen. That is the maddening part. A miner occasionally does uncover a rich pocket, or work a claim that yields strongly for several days, or recover enough coarse gold from a creek bed to send a genuine thrill through the district. Placer deposits in parts of California could still produce remarkable returns in the early 1850s, even if the easiest windfalls were becoming rarer. You may see the proof with your own eyes. A man opens his palm, and there lies a scattering of bright flakes and chunky pieces glowing against lines of dirt. Everyone nearby leans in. The air itself seems to tighten. The emotional effect is immediate. Shoulders straighten. Men who are ready to abandon a poor claim decide to give it another day. A newcomer who had looked discouraged at noon suddenly begins speaking about his long-term prospects with grand philosophical confidence. The sound of shovels seems almost lighter for an hour. Luck, when visible, spreads through camp like the smell of coffee. It reaches everyone. But fortune has a cruel sense of proportion. For every man lifting a small hoard from his poke sack with trembling pride, dozens are scraping together ounces so modest they barely cover food, tools, and shelter. Some work hard and still fail because the ground is poor. Some fail because they arrived late. Some fail because they chose badly, trusted the wrong rumour, or lacked the capital for more effective equipment. And some fail because mining, like all pursuits tied to chance, does not owe fairness to effort. This may be the hardest lesson in the diggings. Sweat and reward are not married here. They only nod politely when introduced. The camps are filled with men trying to look richer than they are. It is a survival instinct of sorts. One man lets a gold watch chain show, though the watch itself may already be pawned in spirit. Another orders drinks for a crowd after a decent clean-up, hoping generosity will make the yield seem larger than it was. A third claims he is merely waiting for a partner to return with supplies before opening a very promising cut, when in truth he has spent the week pulling almost nothing from stubborn gravel. Pride is cheaper than bacon, so people spend it freely. Fraud thrives in that climate. Some men salt a pan by dropping in gold dust before demonstrating a claim to a buyer. The trick is old, simple, and surprisingly effective against greed. A hopeful stranger watches the washing process, sees unmistakable colour, and concludes that the ground must be rich. Money changes hands. By the time the buyer realises the claim is barren, the seller has drifted downriver with fresh funds and a renewed respect for human optimism. Claim jumping, false assays, misleading maps, and exaggerated reports all flourish where information is scarce and desire is not. A classic swindle involves selling ground precisely when it appears ready to improve, or seems to do so. A man works a poor claim just enough to establish possession, then carefully stages evidence of promise. He talks loudly where listeners can hear. He pretends reluctance. He allows himself to be persuaded, with admirable theatrical sorrow, to part with the spot for a tidy sum. The buyer, thrilled at acquiring hidden treasure, begins work the next day and learns that the true hidden treasure was the seller's acting talent. You almost have to admire the elegance, right up until you lose your own money. Weights and measures invite their own mischief. Dust must be weighed, bought, and sold, often in small amounts. Scales can be honest, or almost honest, or just a little philosophical about exactness. Merchants, traders, and buyers sometimes manipulate balances or quote exchange values that drift in their favour like smoke. A miner who has spent 12 hours knee-deep in freezing water is not always in the best condition to challenge arithmetic. Gold dust also gets mixed with black sand, dirt, or moisture, whether by accident or convenience. Tiny discrepancies matter when profits are already thin. Gambling deserves a special place in this world because it feeds on the same appetite that brought everyone west. Faro tables, Monte games, dice, cards, wheel games, and every imaginable variation on hopeful loss appear wherever miners gather with coin or dust in their pockets. The gaming tent glows at night with lantern light and possibility. Inside, the air is warm with tobacco smoke, spilled liquor, lamp oil, and the sour sweetness of tension. Cards slide softly, chips click, voices lower to the hush of concentration or jump suddenly into accusation. A miner may labour a week for modest returns and then try to multiply them in an hour under canvas. Often he achieves the opposite with astonishing efficiency. There is a strange logic to it. Mining itself is a wager against geology, weather, prices, and luck. Gambling merely makes the uncertainty immediate and indoors. Some men who cannot bear another empty day at the creek would rather place their hopes on a deck of cards, where at least the outcome arrives before dawn. Others convince themselves they are too shrewd to be cheated. The gaming operators love this type of person most. Confidence is easier to strip than caution. Not every fraudster works in cards or claims. There are miracle cures for sore backs, bad lungs, weak nerves, failing digestion, and suspiciously ordinary sadness. There are tools advertised as revolutionary improvements that mostly improve the seller's finances. There are transport men who promise safe delivery for baggage, merchants who dilute whiskey, boarding houses that describe a mattress as private accommodation, and correspondents who write home about easy profits while quietly omitting their debts. California is a school for skepticism, though many pay tuition several times. A quirky truth from the goldfields is how often confidence itself counted as a kind of currency. The man who spoke boldly, dressed a little better, and carried himself as though success had already selected him could obtain credit, attract partners, and win attention more easily than a modest but capable miner. This was especially true in new camps where strangers knew little of one another's histories. In such places, biography could be improvised at speed. A failed clerk might become a seasoned prospector by changing districts and lowering his voice when he spoke of experience. Reinvention did not always require achievement. Sometimes it only required a hat, a story, and an audience willing to be impressed. Yet honesty has its own place, and it can be touching when you meet it. You come across men who state plainly that they are not doing well. They share a meal without boasting. They warn newcomers away from poor ground. They keep fair accounts with partners and weigh dust carefully. Such decency stands out because scarcity pressures character from every side. Hardship does not automatically make people cruel, but it does test which virtues they can afford to keep. In camp, a trustworthy partner is worth nearly as much as a good claim, and much harder to replace. The lucky men themselves are not always as lucky as they appear. A rich strike can attract thieves, false friends, borrowers, and endless demands for credit. It can also distort a man's judgment. Someone who wins heavily once may assume skill where chance was doing most of the work. He buys dear equipment, backs a weak venture, lends unwisely, or stays too long in unpromising ground because memory keeps replaying the one golden afternoon. Sudden success can be a trap as surely as sudden loss. Historians still argue over how many dramatic strike stories were polished in later retelling, because mining narratives were often enlarged by memory, whiskey, pride, or the need to justify a difficult life. Legend is rarely weighed on a reliable scale. You see broken dreamers everywhere once your eye adjusts. They are not always dramatic figures slumped by the fire in theatrical despair. More often they are quiet men with worn hats and careful voices who have been in camp a little too long. Their gear is patched beyond dignity. Their claim is always just one more day from turning round. Their talk circles the same reasons for staying. Water was too high. The lower bar was not fully tested. A partner left at the wrong moment. The weather spoiled a promising cut. There is usually some truth in these explanations. There is also often a deeper truth beneath them. Walking away feels like admitting the whole wager was wrong. This is where the psychology of the diggings becomes most revealing. You do not measure life only by present results. You measure it against the near miss, the pan that almost had more, the crevice that showed a little colour, the neighbouring claim that improved 1 yard from yours, the stranger who did well on ground you dismissed. Near misses keep hope alive in a form almost impossible to reason with. A complete failure might send you home, A partial one ties you tighter to the creek. Claims sales become especially dramatic in such a world. Men buy, trade, and abandon ground with astonishing speed. A promising patch may pass through several hands in a month, each owner persuaded that he sees its true potential more clearly than the last. The paperwork, if any exists, may be a scrap of writing, a witness statement, or local custom spoken with deep seriousness. Sometimes these transfers are sensible. Sometimes they resemble a fever dream conducted in mud. Night conversations around the fire reveal the social mathematics of fortune. One miner insists steady, modest returns are better than chasing rumours. Another says only fools stay on ground that merely feeds them. A third has heard of a new district where coarse gold lies thick along the banks. His eyes shine as he speaks, and several listeners begin mentally packing before the coffee cools. You can hear entire futures shifting on little more than tone. That is how unstable life remains here. One story changes a plan, one visible nugget changes a camp. You may also notice that failure does not always look like leaving. Sometimes it looks like adapting. A man who could not prosper with a pan becomes a cook, mule handler, carpenter, saloon assistant, ditch digger, or trader in small goods. Another hires himself out to a larger operation. Someone with neat handwriting begins keeping accounts for a merchant. California teaches hard lessons, but one of the most useful is that gold can be pursued indirectly. The camps quietly produce a whole population of former miners who remain in the diggings while no longer trusting the gravel. Even so, the dream of striking it rich never fully loosens its grip. You see it when a tired man straightens after a long day and glances back at the water as if it had spoken his name. You hear it in the hush that falls when someone pours out fresh dust onto dark cloth for weighing. You feel it in your own chest when the pan reveals just enough colour to make tomorrow seem negotiable. Fortune, fraud, and false starts are all tangled together here, impossible to sort cleanly. The same camp that cheats one man may enrich another. The same rumour that ruins a week may lead to a real discovery. The same hopeful impulse that makes fools easy prey also keeps exhausted bodies returning to the stream. That's what life was really like for many gold miners in California. They lived inside a marketplace of uncertainty, where honest labour, crooked dealing, astonishing luck, and stubborn self-deception shared the same muddy ground. Some rose for a moment into brilliance. Some lost money with admirable speed. Many hovered somewhere between promise and disappointment, learning that in the diggings, the brightest thing was not always the gold. Sometimes it was the story told about it. After enough days in the diggings, you begin to notice something quietly offensive. The men bent double in the creek, shivering over pans and cursing gravel, are not always the ones growing comfortable. Comfort often lives a little uphill, a little drier, and a little cleaner. In the store with the stout lock, the kitchen with the hot stove, the wagon yard with feed sacks stacked under cover, or the gambling tent where lantern light flatters everybody's judgment. Gold may lure miners into California, but in many camps the steadiest profits drift toward people who sell, transport, cook, mend, measure, entertain, or lend. This realization arrives slowly because the mining myth is so loud. Every eye is trained on the stream. Every rumour concerns a claim, a strike, a nugget, a new bar, or a promising cut. Yet while miners kneel in icy water, merchants count cash or gold dust indoors. They stand on dry floors, or at least drier floors, while others do the dreaming for them. It is a tidy arrangement. Hope performs the labour. Commerce collects a service fee. The camp store is usually the clearest example. From outside it may look rough enough. Just a plank structure or reinforced tent with barrels at the door and a sign hanging slightly crooked. Inside, however, sits a kingdom of necessity. Flour, bacon, beans, coffee, picks, shovels, boots, candles, tobacco, blankets, soap, needles, rope, tinware, medicine, shirts, socks, playing cards, whiskey if the local mood permits. The shelves smell of leather, molasses, wood, salt meat, lamp oil, and dust. Every item has travelled far, and every mile has attached another price to it. A miner walks in carrying a little poke of dust from 3 exhausting days at the creek. He walks out with less food than he imagined, poorer boots than he hoped. and a new respect for arithmetic. That is because prices in the diggings can be shocking. A mainstream historical fact of Gold Rush California is that basic goods often sold for far more than similar items in established eastern towns. Transport costs were high, supply was uncertain, and the customers were desperate. Desperation is the merchant's most loyal employee. You watch the storekeeper at work and begin to understand his advantage. He rises each day knowing that nearly everyone in camp must come to him sooner or later. Men can fail to find gold. They cannot fail to need coffee, flour, nails, or a new shovel handle after the old one snaps. The store converts uncertainty into demand. Every broken tool, soaked blanket, worn boot, empty stomach, and pipe craving becomes business. It is difficult not to admire the logic, though easier to admire it when you are not the one paying. Some merchants begin modestly and then expand with astonishing speed. A man who arrives intending to mine notices that he is earning more by selling eggs, tobacco, and dry socks from a crate than by washing gravel in the stream. He adds barrels, hires help, builds walls, extends credit, and before long stands behind a counter with the expression of someone who has discovered the one truly reliable claim in the district. Many miners remain faithful to the dream of striking it rich. The shrewder few realize that the richest vein may be human need. Boarding houses and eating tents do their own brisk trade. A hot meal served under a roof has almost magical value in camp. Even bad stew looks respectable when someone else cooked it, and you do not have to scrub the pot. Boarding houses vary wildly. Some offer a narrow bunk, coarse sheets, and supper that tastes of lard and gratitude. Others are little more than crowded rooms filled with snores, boots, and the breath of 10 exhausted men. Yet even the roughest lodge can command a high price if it provides warmth, regular meals, and a door that shuts. The touch of relative comfort becomes a commodity, a mattress stuffed properly, a clean bowl, bread not full of ash, a corner where rain does not drip onto your face. These things feel almost luxurious because camp life has lowered the bar so far. The boarding house owner knows this and charges accordingly. One amusing truth of the mining towns is that almost any service became more prestigious once it was merely dry, warm, or edible. Cooks, too, occupy an important position. A capable cook can earn steady pay because bad food wears down morale as surely as poor claims wear down hope. In larger camps and more established settlements, cooks serve boarding houses, restaurants, work gangs, and larger mining operations. The kitchen air is thick with boiling coffee, frying meat, yeast, onions if fortune smiles, and the constant heat of iron stoves. Sweat shines on foreheads. Ladles knock against pots. Bread comes out dense but hot, which is close enough to joy in such places. Then there are the teamsters and packers, the men whose wagons and mule trains keep the gold country alive. They haul food, tools, lumber, clothing, mail, machinery, liquor, stoves, and absurdly fragile dreams over roads that barely deserve the name. Their work is difficult, filthy, and often dangerous, but it is also essential. Without transport, the diggings starve, freeze, or stop. You hear them before you see them. Harness chains clink, wheels grind in ruts, mules grunt, balk, and occasionally express strong philosophical objections to hills. Dust rises around the whole procession, coating hats, whiskers, and wagon covers alike. A teamster with reliable animals and decent timing can make very good money. He profits not from gold itself, but from the fact that gold has made remote places hungry. The road becomes a kind of claim, and each successful trip extracts value from every miner at once. Teamsters suffer breakdowns, weather, injury, and theft, certainly. Still, their income may be steadier than that of the man standing in water, waiting for colour to settle in a pan. Steady money has a quiet glamour all its own. Blacksmiths are another group who do well more often than the average miner. In the gold country, metal is always needing repair. Picks dull, shovels bend, horses throw shoes, wagon parts crack, hinges fail. A forge in camp glows like a practical sun. Sparks leap, bellows sigh, iron rings under the hammer. The smell is a sharp mix of hot metal, coal smoke, singed leather, and sweat. A skilled smith can earn respect quickly because nothing in camp stays serviceable for long. Gold mining destroys equipment with remarkable enthusiasm. Carpenters also find work everywhere. Cabins rise, sluices are built, rockers wear out, cradles need repair, storefronts appear from raw boards, bridges, shelves, bunks, counters, tables, and waterworks all require hands that understand wood. A miner may cherish the fantasy of a single giant strike, but the carpenter sells structure to everyone who is staying longer than a week. That can be the sounder wager. You notice that people with specialized skills often have an advantage over pure dreamers. The butcher, baker, ferryman, doctor, tinsmith, tailor, and barber each possess something the camp cannot easily improvise. That matters. In a place flooded with hopeful labourers, skill becomes leverage. One historian's headache is deciding how many supposed miners were truly miners for long, because records suggest a constant movement of people into support roles the moment they recognise where the dependable money sat. The camp is full of men who still call themselves prospectors, while making their real income selling pies, chopping firewood, or repairing boots. Saloon keepers and gambling operators may be the most theatrical winners of all. Their establishments glow at evening like traps baited with light. Inside, glasses clink, dice tumble, faro cards whisper across tables, and the whole room smells of lamp oil, tobacco, spilled liquor, sweat, perfume if any is available, and hopes already beginning to wobble. A miner enters tired, lonely, or lucky, sometimes all three. By midnight he may have traded a fair portion of his week's labour for drink, company, and the right to feel briefly important. The saloon prospers because it sells more than alcohol. It sells noise, warmth, companionship, music, gossip, and the illusion of abundance. For a man who has eaten beans beside a smoky fire for 6 straight nights, a brightly lit room and a strong pour can feel like evidence that he's not merely rotting in the wilderness. The proprietor understands this perfectly. He stocks his shelves, extends selective credit, flatters the fortunate, and removes the troublesome when needed. Gold dust crosses his counter almost as steadily as whiskey. Some of the most profitable figures in the gold towns are the least romantic. Lenders, assayers, buyers of dust, agents, men behind desks. They weigh, record, discount, verify, and convert. A miner may carry raw dust in a leather poke, but he often needs someone to assay it, purchase it, hold it safely, or transfer its value into goods, drafts, or coin. At each step another slice can be taken, not always dishonestly, though dishonesty is never absent for long. The point is simpler. The world of gold requires middlemen, and middlemen rarely volunteer to be poor. You also begin to see how women, though fewer in number in many mining districts, often find economic opportunities unavailable to men who lack capital or luck. A woman running a boarding house, laundry, bakery, or eating room may earn well because demand is immediate and constant. This does not mean the work is easy. Far from it. It is laborious, exhausting, and often performed under scrutiny or risk. Yet the imbalance of camp society creates openings. Men who cannot boil coffee without incident will pay dearly for someone who can provide clean shirts, decent meals, or a room that does not resemble a collapsed tool shed. Laundry in particular becomes quietly profitable. Miners ruin clothing at a heroic rate, and many hate washing almost as much as they hate an empty pan. To scrub shirts, drawers, socks, towels, and blankets in sufficient quantity requires water, soap, muscle, time, and the willingness to handle garments that appear to have survived a mudslide and a small fire. The laundress earns every coin. The smell of boiling wash water, wet cloth, lye soap, and steam may not be glamorous, but it signals one of the most practical businesses in the district. A quirky detail from gold rush life is that eggs, fresh milk, and vegetables could fetch astonishing prices in some camps, making gardeners, dairy keepers, and poultry sellers unexpectedly important. Imagine kneeling in a freezing creek for 2 days only to realize the fellow selling onions may be doing better than you are. History has a sense of humor, and it is often aimed at the proud. Even entertainment can outperform mining. Musicians, theatre troupes, dancing masters, performers, and lecturers appear in larger towns, because any population of tired, lonely, gold-chasing men will eventually pay to be distracted from itself. A fiddle in a saloon corner, a small stage with comic songs, a lecture on some grand subject no one quite remembers by the end. These things gather dust from pockets just as effectively as a store ledger. The gold rush does not produce only miners. It produces audiences. None of this means service work is easy or universally successful. Merchants can be ruined by theft, fire, bad shipments, or overextended credit. Teamsters lose animals and wagons. Boarding house keepers wrestle with shortages, disease, and drunk patrons. Gamblers can be robbed. Blacksmiths work brutally hard. Cooks roast beside stoves and rise before dawn. Yet compared with the average miner's income, these occupations often offer something priceless predictability. Not comfort exactly, but steadier returns. And in the gold country, steady returns can look almost indecently luxurious. You feel the social tension this creates. A miner who has spent the day hauling gravel may resent the shopkeeper's dry hands and full shelves. He may mock the merchant as soft, the saloon keeper as parasitic, the gambler as a vulture, the boarding house owner as a bandit, and the dust buyer as a cheat. Sometimes he's correct. Sometimes he's only angry that the creek has treated him poorly, while commerce treated someone else well. Moral judgment in camp often follows the direction of money. Still, the evidence keeps piling up around you. The merchant builds a larger store, the teamster adds mule, the boarding house extends a porch, the blacksmith hires an assistant, the gambler replaces canvas with planks. Meanwhile, many miners remain in patched shirts, eating salt pork and waiting for the strike that will explain everything. That contrast is one of the deepest truths of California gold life. The diggings attracted people with visions of instant wealth, but the most dependable fortunes often came from supplying the vision rather than sharing it. As you watch this little economy grow around the streams, the whole gold rush begins to look less like a simple hunt for treasure, and more like the rapid birth of a rough society. Mines are only one organ in the body. Roads, stores, kitchens, laundries, smithies, gambling rooms, freight yards, and boarding houses make the rest of it breathe. The man in the creek may still find gold. Some do. But many more make California pay by charging for supper, sharpening tools, hauling freight, mending clothes, weighing dust, or offering a bed and a roof against the rain. The bright metal in the river starts the story. The people who really make money are often the ones who learn how to stand beside the river and bill everyone who comes near it. The longer you stay in the gold country, the more clearly you see that a claim is never just a patch of earth. It is an argument waiting for witnesses. A line in the gravel can decide who eats well, who leaves camp angry, and who wakes to find his future stolen by sunrise. In places where gold lies scattered through streambeds and banks, law becomes a nervous thing, half written and half shouted, always one bad temper away from collapse. At first glance, camp order can look surprisingly civilized. Notices are nailed to posts or trees, meetings are called, men gather with hats low over their eyes and debate rules about claim size, abandoned ground, water use, and how long a man may be absent before others may declare his spot open. These discussions can sound almost parliamentary until you notice half the audience is muddy to the knee, underfed, and carrying tools heavy enough to settle a dispute very quickly. Democracy feels different when everyone owns a shovel. A mainstream fact of the California diggings is that many mining camps created their own local codes because formal government authority was weak, slow, or distant. These codes varied from place to place. One camp allowed a certain number of feet along a stream. Another limited how many claims one man could hold. Some recognized discovery rights strongly. Others focused more on active work. The principle beneath them was simple enough. If the state could not establish order fast enough, the miners would improvise their own version and pray it held. Sometimes it did. That was worth saying clearly. Gold camp life was not constant chaos from dawn to dusk. Many camps enforced rules with a rough practicality that let people work, trade, and sleep with some confidence. Men served on committees. Disputes were heard. Witnesses testified. Decisions were announced. A crowd's opinion carried weight because no one wanted to be on the wrong side of a large, irritated population with picks. Custom could become surprisingly stable when enough people found it useful, but stability in the diggings was always thin. The ground itself encouraged conflict. A claim might prove poor for weeks, and then suddenly yield well after a shift in water or a deeper cut. That meant a boundary was never just a technical matter. It was an emotional wire charged with envy. Every foot of gravel could hide a day's wages or a year's salvation. A man who believed his neighbour had crossed the line did not feel mildly inconvenienced. He felt robbed by inches. You hear these quarrels before you understand them. Angry voices rise over the creek. Shovels stop. Men straighten from their work and turn toward the noise with quick interest. Two miners stand near a bank, one red-faced and jabbing a finger at a row of stones marking a claim edge. The other answers with cold insistence, which is often more dangerous than shouting. Soon several bystanders drift closer. Someone says he saw the line set differently last week. Someone else says the current moved the marker. A third man swears both parties are liars. In the diggings, public drama draws attendance better than church. The atmosphere during a claim dispute is always sharp. Wet wool, river mud, sweat, and tobacco smoke mingle in the cool air. Boots grind gravel. Hands rest on tool handles in ways that are perhaps casual and perhaps not. Everyone watches not only the argument but the audience, because the crowd will often decide the practical outcome before any formal judgment does. If a man seems obviously wrong, he may back down. If he seems dangerous, he may gather supporters. Justice in camp is never entirely blind. It squints hard at numbers. Claim jumping is among the dirtiest accusations a miner can face. To seize another man's ground, especially while he is absent only briefly, or still visibly working it, is to challenge both property and reputation. Some jumpers rely on speed, hoping to establish possession before the rightful miner returns with allies. Others use technicalities, claiming the ground was abandoned, underworked, or never properly marked. The legal elegance of such arguments often disguises plain opportunism. Gold has a way of making theft sound procedural. Water rights create their own breed of tension. Mining is not only about the earth, it is also about the flow that washes gravel and runs rockers, sluices, and later more ambitious systems. Whoever controls the water can make poor ground workable and good ground profitable. Ditches, races, channels, and access points therefore become intensely important. A man diverted from needed water may watch his whole day's labour dry up under the sun. That sort of frustration does not produce gentle conversation. In some camps, the most serious fights begin not with gold itself, but with timing. Who reached a bar first after high water dropped? Who returned from town before the absence limit expired? Who had the right to reopen a trench left idle during illness? These questions sound narrow until you picture how much depends on them. Historians still argue over how consistently local mining codes were enforced in different districts, because surviving accounts show both orderly processes and wild improvisation. A tidy, minute book can survive on paper, while memory recalls the meeting as a one long shouting match in mud. Formal officers do exist in California by the 1850s. Of course, sheriffs, justices of the peace, constables, judges, and state officials are not imaginary. But the goldfields grow and shift so quickly that public authority often lags behind lived reality. A sheriff may be miles away. A court may be slow, expensive, or poorly suited to an argument over a stream bar half cut away by current. So miners continue to rely on local assemblies, elected arbitrators, and collective enforcement. The law is present, but not always close enough to stop a fist, a knife, or a midnight theft. Violence is therefore never far from the surface, not constant, but available. That is the distinction that matters. Most men prefer to avoid bloodshed because injury is dangerous. Doctors are unreliable, and a dead partner contributes poorly to shared labour. Yet when fortunes are uncertain, tempers short, and whiskey cheap, avoidance does not always win. A blow struck in anger over cards can echo into a claim dispute by morning. An insult in a saloon may return at the creek with witnesses and tools. A misunderstanding between strangers from different languages or customs can harden quickly when nobody wishes to appear weak. The weapons themselves are part of the landscape. Knives at belts, pistols tucked into waistbands or saddlebags, rifles in cabins, wagons or store corners. Tools too, of course. Picks, shovels, axes, hammers. A mining camp contains enough metal to support both industry and very poor decisions. Yet much of the menace lies less in constant use than in constant presence. Everyone knows how quickly an argument could go badly. That knowledge shapes posture, tone, and the habit of choosing allies carefully. Whiskey deserves its share of blame, though not all of it. Alcohol softens caution and sharpens grievances with admirable efficiency. A man who has worked cold and hungry all day, then lost at cards or heard a rumour that his claim is weakening, may not require much encouragement to take offence. Saloons in the mining towns are warm, bright, and often crowded with exactly the conditions under which pride performs its worst work. Lamplight throws shadows across faces, cards slap. Glasses knock wood, tobacco haze softens the room. Then one careless word lands, and the whole atmosphere changes at once. A quirky but revealing detail from the period is how often camps turn to public meetings as if they were a cure for everything. Missing mule, disputed claim, theft accusation, nuisance complaint, local election, boundary disagreement, suspected cheating. All roads seem to lead to a gathering of men under open sky or in a rough hall, each determined to be reasonable right up until reason became inconvenient. This habit tells you something important. Even in unstable places, people crave a structure that makes force look like fairness. Rough justice emerges from that craving. Suppose a thief is caught, or a man widely believed to be one. Suppose a gambler is accused of cheating too boldly, or a claim jumper has finally irritated the wrong district, or a murderer is rumoured to be hiding under a false name. The camp may not wait patiently for distant authorities. A meeting is called, evidence is heard, or what passes for evidence in an atmosphere of urgency and bias. A committee may be appointed, a verdict may come quickly, punishment may range from whipping, expulsion, and destruction of property to more severe consequences. The line between communal self-defence and mob rule can become alarmingly thin. You feel the danger most in the crowd itself. A single angry man is readable, a crowd is weather. It mutters, shifts, and suddenly settles around a judgment with frightening speed. Faces harden, hats tilt forward. Men who might doubt privately stay silent because silence is safer than defending someone unpopular. A few strong voices begin steering the mood. The air smells of dust, sweat, horses, old smoke, and excitement that no one dares call excitement. Everyone insists the matter is regrettable, necessary, unfortunate, regrettably necessary, and somehow also satisfying. Vigilance committees appear in some places when residents believe ordinary law enforcement has failed them. These groups are often praised by participants as protectors of order and criticised by others as dangerous usurpers. Both views can be true at once. In fast-growing gold towns, especially where crime, corruption, or delay feels intolerable, committees promise immediate action. Immediate action is appealing when your goods have been stolen or your neighbour murdered. It is less comforting when you remember how often rumour leads the parade, and rumour does lead much of it. A camp does not need certainty to become convinced. It needs a story told convincingly enough by the right mouths. Someone was seen near the cabin. Someone had no clear explanation for where his dust came from. Someone used a false name. Someone asked too many questions about a claim. Someone is said to have fled another district under suspicious circumstances. The diggings run on hearsay nearly as much as on water. That makes justice quick, but not always accurate. Still, it would be wrong to imagine everyone as savage or irrational. Many miners care deeply about fairness because fairness protects their own labour. They know property rules matter. They know theft poisons trade. They know indiscriminate violence makes camps unlivable. Even your rough men can be principled in practical ways. A jury of miners may listen carefully. A crowd may insist on witnesses. An accused man may speak at length in his own defence. The roughness lies not only in brutality, but in the fragility of the system itself. Good order depends on local trust, and trust is never abundant where fortunes slide in and out of the mud. You notice, too, that reputation becomes a kind of shield. A man known as steady, fair, and useful can survive accusations more easily than a drifter already half suspected by everyone. The opposite is also true. Someone considered arrogant, secretive, foreign, unlucky, or merely irritating may receive less patience than justice would ideally require. Human communities seldom distribute mercy evenly, and frontier camps do not improve the habit. Night sharpens all these tensions. Cabins and tents glow with firelight. Beyond them, the dark feels thick and listening. Footsteps on a path outside a shelter can sound innocent or threatening. A horse moving suddenly in the gloom may send a hand toward a pistol before the mind catches up. A miner hides his dust carefully. Another sleeps lightly after quarrelling over a claim line that morning. Somewhere a dog barks at nothing you can see. The gold country has many sounds at night, and all of them seem to ask whether your belongings, your body, and your luck will still be yours at dawn. This was life in the California diggings for many ordinary miners. Law existed, but often in fragments. Justice existed, but often under pressure. Violence was not the whole story, yet it waited inside many stories as a possible ending. Men built rules because they needed them, then tested those rules whenever money, pride, drink, fear, or rumour pushed hard enough. You learn to read not only the stream and the gravel, but faces, alliances, and the mood of a gathering crowd. In a place where wealth could appear in a pan and vanish in a quarrel, survival required more than strong hands. It required judging when a dispute should be argued, when it should be witnessed, and when it should be left alone before rough justice decided to do the talking for everyone. For all the noise made by miners, mule trains, claim meetings, and saloons, you gradually discover that camp life depends on many people who are not the men standing in the creek with pans. The popular story of California gold likes a solitary figure in boots, hat low, eyes fixed on the water, as though history were built by one tired fellow and his shovel. Real life is less flattering and far more crowded. Behind every miner's day stands a web of labour that cooks, cleans, carries, patches, nurses, launders and sells, entertains and endures. Women are part of this world from the beginning, though their presence is often reduced in later legend to a decorative footnote or a sentimental postcard. In truth, their work can be central, profitable, risky, and relentless. You see women running boarding houses where 40 men rely on hot meals and some approximation of order. You see them baking bread before dawn, washing shirts until their fingers chap, tending children in cramped rooms, keeping accounts, nursing the sick, sewing torn garments, serving coffee to men too tired to say thank you properly, and negotiating prices with a firmness that would make a claim jumper think twice. The first thing you notice is scarcity. In many mining districts, as men vastly outnumber women, especially in the earlier and rougher camps. That imbalance changes the social climate of everything. It creates opportunity for those able to provide domestic labour and basic services. But it also creates loneliness, tension, and constant scrutiny. A woman walking through a mining town is often noticed by every eye, which must be exhausting even before the actual work begins. The air around her may smell of flour, soap, lamp oil, horse sweat, and tobacco, but also of attention, and attention is often the heaviest thing in the room. Boarding houses are among the clearest centres of hidden labour. From the outside, one may look like a simple structure of boards and canvas, smoke lifting from its stovepipe, boots lined at the porch, perhaps a kettle steaming near the door. Inside, it is a machine of constant motion. Bread must be mixed, pork must be fried, beans must be soaked, boiled, and served. Coffee must be made in quantities large enough to revive an army. Beds must be aired, floors swept, blankets shaken, plates scrubbed, and tempers managed. The boarding house smells of hot iron, fresh bread when fortune allows, wet wool, gravy, steam, and too many men in one space. A miner paying for supper sees only the plate set before him. He does not always see the long chain behind it. firewood hauled and chopped, flour bought dear, water carried, grease saved, dough kneaded, dishes cleaned in water that quickly turns cloudy with ash and scraps, clothes mended between tasks, accounts tracked by candlelight after everyone else is asleep. The gold rush has a genius for making necessary work invisible, just when it becomes most essential. Laundry is another world of labour that holds camp life together. A shirt dragged through creek mud, sweat, smoke, and days of hard use does not restore itself by moral effort. Someone must soak it, scrub it, boil it, rinse it, wring it, dry it, and perhaps patch it before handing it back. The smell of lye soap, wet cloth, steam, and heated irons becomes part of the camp's real economy. Clean shirts reduce chafing. Clean blankets help with comfort and health. Clean bandages matter more than most miners want to admit. Laundry sounds humble until you imagine a camp without it. Then it begins to look like civilization in an apron. In California's gold regions, many laundresses are women, but not all are white American women. Chinese migrants, Mexican women, Chilean women, and women from many backgrounds contribute to this service economy, often under difficult and prejudiced conditions. This diversity is one of the plain historical realities of the gold rush. The camps and towns are far more international than the old myths suggest. Yet the work done by migrant families, immigrant women, and people outside the loudest version of the story is often left off the heroic canvas. Cooking follows the same pattern. A pot of stew seems ordinary until you consider who bought the ingredients, protected them from thieves and rats, stretched them through the week, and served them on time to people who judge quickly and thank poorly. The hands that prepare food carry burns, nicks, flour dust, and fatigue. The kitchen heat in summer can be brutal. The early rising in winter is worse. Pots blacken with soot, iron lids clang, dough sticks to wrists, meat spits grease. Coffee stains everything it touches except mysteriously. The moods of men who believe coffee should simply appear. Domestic labour has always suffered from being both obvious and ignored. Some women enter the gold towns through marriage or family migration, travelling with husbands, brothers, children, or kin. Others arrive widowed, abandoned, or determined to earn on their own. Some run respectable businesses in the language of the day. Some live in more precarious ways, working where male demand is high and legal protections weak. The mining frontier is not kind to vulnerability. A woman managing a business must often be practical, tough, and alert to danger, because debts, theft, drunkenness, and harassment are never far away. Even success can attract unwanted interest. Children are present too, though the mining legend rarely pauses for them. In more settled camps and growing towns, children haul water, watch younger siblings, run errands, gather kindling, help with animals, wash dishes, and learn early how quickly a place can change when fortune rises or falls. Their world smells of dust, bread crusts, smoke, soap, animal pens, and muddy streets. They hear songs from saloons, church bells if any exist, hammers from carpenters, and the steady language of adults talking money in every possible tone. Childhood in the diggings is not separate from the adult world. It is lived inside it. Family life in the gold regions is often fragile, improvised, and deeply practical. A wife may keep the accounts while her husband tries mining, or the arrangement may quietly reverse when her boarding house, bakery, or laundry proves steadier than his claim. In some households, women become the real financial anchor while men continue clinging to mining dreams that pay mostly in stories. This is one of the less celebrated truths of frontier life. Masculine legend may dominate public memory, but household survival often depends on who can turn labour into regular income. The answer is not always the man with the shovel. A quirky detail from the gold rush years is how quickly domestic skills could become premium services in places where ordinary life had collapsed into chaos. A decent pie, a fresh loaf, a properly made bed, a repaired shirt, or a room that smelled of soap instead of damp boots could command real money. Men who claimed to seek only gold often revealed their true priorities the moment someone offered them warm bread and a clean pillowcase. Civilization it turns out, could be rented by the night. You also begin to see the emotional labour hidden inside camp life. Someone must calm quarrels at supper before they turn into fights. Someone must soothe a sick man too proud to admit fear. Someone must write letters for the illiterate or read letters aloud to those who cannot decipher cramped handwriting. Someone must remember whose mother died back east, whose child is teething, whose partner has not returned, whose cough is growing worse, whose credit is nearly exhausted. These quiet acts of attention rarely appear in the grand narrative of the gold rush. Yet without them, camp society would feel even harsher than it already does. Women's work in the gold country can also blur into public roles that later history misfiles or forgets. Innkeepers, business owners, property holders, entertainers, shop assistants, cooks, seamstresses, and healers all shape the life of towns and camps. Some make substantial profits, others scrape by. A few become locally famous. Many more remain known only to the people who depended on them daily. Historians still debate how far we can generalize from surviving records, because the documentary trail favors those who owned property, left letters, or drew official notice. Much ordinary female labour disappears into account books, census lines, and the memory of men who took service for granted. Entertainers occupy another curious place in the social world of the diggings. Singers, dancers, actresses, musicians, and women working in dance halls or saloons move through the camps as both attraction and necessity, depending on whom you ask. Their presence offers diversion, companionship, fantasy, and business. It also invites moral panic from reformers and admiration from lonely miners who have spent too long among mud, cards, and other men. The line between entertainment, commerce, respectability, and exploitation is seldom neat here. It is shaped by money, gender imbalance, race, law, and the simple fact that frontier society is built fast and judged slowly. Race and ethnicity affect every layer of this hidden labour. Chinese communities in particular play major roles in cooking, laundry, gardening, small trade, and service work, even while facing violent prejudice, discriminatory taxes, and exclusion. Mexican and Chilean families bring knowledge, labour, and commercial skill shaped by earlier mining traditions. Native women and men are present too, though often under conditions of displacement, coercion, or marginalisation as the rush disrupts indigenous communities and territories. California's gold economy is never only the story of Anglo-American miners. It is built from many hands, often unequally valued. The atmosphere of a more settled mining town reveals this hidden structure clearly if you know where to look. Not just the creek and the claim posts, but the bakery window fogged by heat, the wash line stiff with shirts in mountain air, the child carrying a pail twice too big for comfort, the boarding house porch where boots wait in a neat row at dusk, the lamplight over a ledger as someone calculates flour costs and unpaid meals, the smell of yeast, onions, soap, wet cotton, and coal smoke rising behind the public noise of saloons and blacksmiths. Real community is made there, in the tasks that repeat whether or not anyone finds gold. Caregiving during sickness exposes this truth with special force. When fever spreads, when dysentery weakens a whole room, when a cough turns frightening, it is often women, relatives, hired helpers, or members of local communities who wash bedding, cool foreheads, prepare broth, carry water, change bandages, and sit through the night listening to difficult breathing. Doctors may visit, medicine may be prescribed, but nursing is daily work, intimate and tiring. It asks for patience rather than drama. Gold Rush memory loves drama. Patience is harder to bronze into a statue. Even religion and moral order often lean on hidden labour. Someone sweeps the room before a Sunday service. Someone sews the cloth for a cradle or coffin. Someone arranges flowers when any can be found. Someone keeps a child quiet during prayer, bakes food for a communal meal, or prepares garments for burial. Life in the camps is raw enough that these acts matter intensely. They create moments when the place feels less like a temporary scramble and more like a human settlement. You begin to suspect that the real miracle in California is not that some men pull gold from gravel. It is that anybody manages to live at all in places so raw, crowded, and improvised. The creek may generate the headlines, but the camp survives on repetitive care. Someone must clean the pot. Someone must mend the shirt. Someone must sweep the floor, keep the books, tend the child, boil the water, nurse the fever, feed the boarders, wash the sheets. And remember that tomorrow will ask for all of it again. This is what lies behind the legend. Not only prospectors with dreams of striking rich, but women, families, migrants, servants, wives, widows, laundresses, cooks, children, and small business keepers whose labour makes the gold country livable enough for the dream to continue. Their work is often hidden not because it is minor, but because it is constant. It does not glitter in a pan. It rises in steam from a wash kettle, in the smell of bread from an oven, in the neat patch on a miner's shirt, in the quiet hand on a sick brow, in the account book balanced by candlelight after the camp has gone dark. Without that labour, the great California adventure would not merely be poorer, it would stop. At some point the gold itself begins to look different to you, not in colour. It still carries that warm yellow glow in the pan, that soft stubborn brightness against dark sand, that little flash capable of tightening every throat nearby. But its meaning changes. In the early days, or at least in the early state of mind, gold looks like escape. It looks like a door flung open. It looks like the answer to every cramped room, unpaid bill, tired horse, and hard year you have ever known. After enough as months in California, it starts to resemble something more complicated. A test, perhaps a habit, a reason to stay one more week when good sense has already packed its bag. This is how the dream grows dim, not all at once, and not with proper dramatic courtesy. No trumpet sounds. No official arrives to inform you that your allotted share of optimism has been exhausted. Instead, the change comes through repetition. Another day in cold water for modest colour, another trip to the store where prices remain offensively alive, another rumour that collapses into ordinary gravel, another miner leaving camp with less than he brought, another season turning, reminding you that time itself has been steadily mining you in return. You see the signs all around. Camps that once hummed with excited arrivals begin to look worn at the edges. Canvas sags. Pathways deepen into old scars of mud and dust. Store shelves may still be full, but the faces leaning across the counter are less dazzled now, more deliberate, more tired. The loudest boasters have either vanished, struck luck and moved on, or learned silence. Men speak less often of a single magnificent strike, and more often of expenses, water, wages. And whether the deeper ground justifies the labour, hope remains, but it has acquired calluses. The land itself reflects the change. River bars, once spoken of with awe, are chewed over and turned out. Banks show cuts and trenches where shovels bit deep. Trees near camp are fewer. Tailings lie in grey heaps beside worked ground. Water runs muddier in places that were once clear. The earth no longer appears untouched and promising. It appears used. This is one of the plain historical truths of the California gold country. As the richest and easiest place to deposits were worked out in many areas, mining became harder, more capital hungry, and more organised. The lone hopeful figure with a pan could still find something. Yes, but the age of effortless picking was fading fast. You feel that shift in the daily rhythm. More men talk about ditches, flumes, deeper cuts, partnerships and machinery. Rockers and sluices give way in some districts to larger undertakings requiring pooled labour and greater expense. Water must be diverted, claims consolidated, tools upgraded, and profits divided. The dream that once promised independence begins quietly demanding organisation. There is a certain irony in this. Many came west to escape ordinary dependence, only to discover that the stubborn ground prefers teams, investors, and supply networks. Freedom, it turns out, was easier to imagine than to maintain. The men around you respond in different ways. Some become harder and more practical. They calculate costs closely, choose spots carefully, and speak of mining less as romance than as work. These are often the ones who last longer. Though lasting and flourishing are not always the same, others remain loyal to old fantasies even as evidence drips from every pan. They are still listening for the rumour that will rescue the season, still turning toward every new gulch name with hungry attention, still explaining that real fortune lies just beyond this disappointing stretch of creek. Perhaps they are fools. Perhaps they are merely human. You also notice departures. They do not always happen in public or with speeches. A man sells his tools quietly and heads toward the valley. Another takes a job with a freight company. Someone else leaves for San Francisco, Sacramento, Marysville, Stockton, or a smaller town that now offers business opportunities sturdier than the stream. A former miner opens a shop, hires himself out as a carpenter, tends bar, drives a wagon, cuts timber, runs a ferry, or starts farming in one of the valleys being drawn into California's rapidly changing economy. This is a major truth hidden beneath the old glittering image. Many who did not find gold directly still became part of California's growth by settling into other work. Statehood, expanding trade, town building, roads, farms, steamship routes, and commercial networks all reshape the place around you. California in the 1850s is not simply a field of scattered tents anymore. It is becoming a state in motion, rough and unequal, yet unmistakably more fixed than the first fevered rush. Stores gain proper fronts, streets appear where paths used to wander, courthouses, churches, schools, and newspapers take root, property values, taxes, and lawsuits begin to matter in ways that feel suspiciously like civilization returning with a clipboard. Gold made the door. Settlement keeps walking through it. Not everyone can or wants to adapt. Some men truly do return home, though home itself may have shifted in their absence. A few go back with decent earnings, enough to buy land, pay debts, marry, or open a business elsewhere. Others return with little to show except a worn body, stories polished by necessity, and a new understanding of how expensive hope can be. There are also those who never quite leave California but never quite settle either. They drift from district to district, following rumours into thinner and thinner promises. Camps become towns, towns become routine, and still they seek the next opening where luck might finally apologise. A quirky and slightly sad detail from the era is how often men kept bits of poor equipment long after it made economic sense, as though a battered pan, a cracked shovel handle, or a worn poke sack contained the remains of the dream itself. Objects gather feeling in hard places. A man may sell a mule, a blanket, or his last good boots, but hesitate over a pan that has yielded almost nothing. To give it up feels too much like admitting the whole chase has closed. The emotional weather of this period is difficult to name because it is not simple despair. Many miners are not broken in some theatrical frontier way. They are simply altered. Their laughter is drier. Their faces are older. Their expectations have been planned down to a workable shape. A good day's take pleases them, but it no longer convinces them that heaven has signed a contract. They understand prices, luck, and bodily limits too well for that. Historians still argue about how ordinary miners describe their own disappointment, because letters home often soften failure while diaries can sharpen it. Pride edits memory carefully. So does distance. By now you have seen enough to recognise the pattern. The gold rush does not divide people neatly into winners and losers. It leaves a much larger middle ground filled with survivors, adapters, and those who carry on under revised terms. A man who once expected to become rich may settle for regular wages on a larger operation. Another may discover that he prefers trade to digging. Someone else, after years of uncertainty, plants crops in a valley and watches the soil for a different kind of return. California's transformation depends on these choices just as much as on dramatic strikes. The fading of the easy dream creates the harder reality of a society. Still, there is loss in this transition. The campfire talk changes, fewer wild boasts, more practical questions. The bright madness of the first fever cools into something steadier and less magical. Even the air seems to hold a different mood. Morning mist still rises from streams. Pine smoke still drifts over cabins. Mules still stamp and jingle their harness chains. Yet the atmosphere has shifted from reckless possibility to negotiated endurance. Men have learned too much. Knowledge is useful, but it's not always cheerful. You feel this, especially at dusk, when work is done and the light turns soft over ground cut by so many hands. The stream keeps moving, indifferent as ever. Water slides around stones that have watched thousands of hopeful faces bend over them. The smell of wet earth rises cool and mineral in the evening. Supper smoke hangs low. Somewhere a hammer taps at a repair. Somewhere else a laugh breaks out and fades. Camp life continues, but without the first wild electricity. The miracle has become maintenance. Some decide to stay because there is nothing better to return to. That is one of the deepest truths of the Gold Country and one of the least romantic. Leaving sounds simple only if you have money, family welcome, good health, and another plan. Many do not. California may disappoint them, but it still offers a movement, occasional wages, a chance at some claim, or the possibility of blending into a new town where no one asks too many questions. A harsh place can become home not because it is kind, but because it is available. Others stay because they truly begin to belong to the place. This may seem surprising after so much hardship, yet it happens often enough. A man becomes accustomed to the mountain air, the resin smell after rain, the long blue distances, the dry summer dust, the rough company, the peculiar freedom of not being who he once was. He has suffered here, yes, but he has also been remade here. California, in the 1850s, offers reinvention at a brutal price, and some, having paid enough, refuse to leave the ground where the bargain took effect. There is also the simple, stubborn pull of almost enough gold, almost a productive cut, almost a good season, almost the right partnership, almost the start of a proper business. Human lives are often governed by almost, and the mining districts are full of it. Men stay not because success has arrived, but because failure has not quite finished its sentence. The pan still gives a little colour, the trader still offers short credit, the weather still allows work, the body still rises in the morning, almost as sometimes all it takes. As the dream dims, California itself keeps brightening in other ways. Agricultural valleys expand, ports grow busier, town lots become worth disputing, merchants invest, roads improve in places, laws multiply. Families arrive in greater numbers. The economy broadens beyond gold, though gold remains its great rude engine. You can feel a society thickening around the camps, drawing labour and ambition into forms that no longer depend entirely on a lucky pan in a cold creek. The great irony is that the fading of one fantasy helps create a more durable reality. Yet on some evenings, or when the light hits the water just so, the old feeling returns for a moment. The stream glows. The stones shine with false and true glints alike. A miner bends, washes, lifts the pan, and everyone nearby pauses with that old involuntary hunger. There it is again. The possibility, small, ridiculous, immortal. You would think hardship had cured it by now. It has not. Hardship merely teaches the feeling to live in smaller rooms. So the question becomes not whether the dream was false, but what it made of you. Did it strip you down to labour and appetite? Did it teach you trade, caution, endurance, or compromise? Did it leave you poorer in coin but richer in hard knowledge? Did it pull you into California's making, whether as miner, merchant, farmer, cook, teamster, or one more anonymous figure helping turn raw camps into a state? Gold may not have given you the life first imagined. Still, the chase has drawn you into another life entirely, one built from mud, smoke, noise, risk, and the slow settling of reality. And now, as the camp quiets and the hills darken, you let the whole place soften around you. The voices near the fire sink lower. The creek keeps its patient whisper over stone. Smoke rises thin into the cooling air and loses itself among the pines. The ground beneath your boots, once measured only for profit, feels older and calmer than all the men who crossed it in a fever. Their hopes flashed brightly, then thinned like mist at sunrise. Yet the mountains remained. The water remained. Evening gathers the harsh edges of the day and smooths them gently. You breathe in the scent of ash, damp earth, and resin. You hear a last quiet clink of metal set aside for the night. Somewhere a mule settles. Somewhere a lantern is lowered, and its glow shrinks to amber, then dimmer still. The sky above the ridges grows deep and wide, holding the camp in a softer darkness. The gold no longer dazzles the way it once did. It glimmers more faintly now, like a thought half remembered, like a promise that was never fully yours and yet somehow changed you all the same. You sit with that feeling without resisting it. The ambition, the ache, the hunger, the long road, the cold water, the smoke in your clothes, the weight of small hopes carried day after day. All of it can loosen now. The camp need not explain itself any further. The stories settle, the tools rest, the rough voices fade into the night air until they sound almost tender. California, harsh and restless by day, grows still enough to let your mind drift. And as the darkness deepens, the creek goes on murmuring through the stones, steady and untroubled, as if it has always known that people come chasing bright things, stay for a while in dust and longing, and then pass quietly into silence. The hills keep watch. The pines breathe their cool scent into the night. The fire sinks to a bed of red coals. At last, even the dream grows quiet, and you are left only with the hush of water, the softness of distant smoke, and the gentle comfort of letting the whole gold country fade into sleep.